Today we have with us Dr. B. Anjan Kumar Proste. So before he start a session, I would like to give a brief introduction about him. He's a friend of mine, a very close friend, and he, since inception of the process of developing this postgraduate diploma in sustainability science, it means since 2010, he is closely involved in developing this program, and he wrote a number of units. Not only that, in the past few years, he involved in different activities under the discipline of sustainable science in IGNOU. He is the product of Sambalpur University, did his MSc and MPhil from Sambalpur University, PhD from Bharatiya University in Bamrin biogeochemistry. Before he joined Calicut University, he was in Gujarat Institute of Desert Ecology for a few years. Before that, he was in Salim Ali Conservation of Sarcone Sarcone Combator. He has extensively traveled in most part of India as a part of different research project, and he was also involved in high-level academic team in UNESCO. So with this, I would like to invite Anjan to start the session.
Yes. Yeah. Should I?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, sir. Thank you so much. And well, at outset, I mean, and I to get you the program. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I mean, it's a pleasure for me to interact with all the who are present in the course virtually to discuss about something which often people call it a very contentious issue. All the program I've been telling to Sarah that more than a contentious issue, it is one of the subdomains in the branch of science which requires its due academic credit. So environmental impact assessment is something in our country we are talking more in terms of giving a clearance or environmental clearance for initiative development project. But if we go to the Western world, I mean, it has its own charm and it has its own academic credit. People take it as one of the subjects, and there is a lot of research avenues attached with it. However, let us have a brief discussion on the concept, what exactly environmental impact assessment is, and how do we have an approach to carry out an environmental impact assessment. It's actually a very vast domain, so cannot be just understood or discussed in 1 or 2 or 3 lectures, but then and I'm sure I'm accessible. You can always approach Dr. Sarath. Anything you want to know from me, or my contact details also will be there by email or otherwise also. So we will be able to discuss on certain technical aspects also if there are certain things to be discussed. However, without investing much time, let us start the session that about environmental impact assessment. Now, if one talks about environmental impact assessment, it first talks about environmental assessment, and then comes the impact. If we look at in a graded manner or a sequential manner, that's me of the most Martin.
Anjan.
Yes.
Anjan. Seems an internet network is very poor in your side. So what you can do, you put up video sharing option. Put up video sharing option. आप video off कर देना.
Have I put it on?
आप video off कर देना. Please off the video.
Okay.
Then you start.
Yes. Is that fine?
Yeah, that is fine. Okay.
Great, thank you. So I think I should be able to do that now.
Please carry on.
Yeah, am I in the slide number 2, Martin Luther King? Is it visible? Sarath, is
आप
it
एक बार
visible? Am I audible?
ऑडिबल एक बार स्लाइड नंबर 1 में आएगा. स्लाइड नंबर 1. आई वांट टू डू समथिंग.
Okay.
Yes,
Shall we
yes, you
start
carry on.
afresh
Yeah, you
or?
start. Okay, start. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. I think is a graded process of environment assessment and that rightly reminds me of a famous quote by Martin Luther King, who had actually, paraphrased in a way that the means by which we live have outdistanced the ends for which we live. And rightly, if one looks at the very
Unable to hear you. We are not able to hear you. Anjan? Sangat kanu hai de sangat andam nang.
is it better?
Network is very poor. Okay.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes. So consequentially, if you look at in a long-term basis, ultimately we have guiding missiles, but completely misguiding the human fraternity, human being. So with that, I'll actually take you to a geological time scale, maybe somewhere around 100,000 years ago, when the dispersal of modern humans started on Earth. That was the time when we used to, live inside nature. And basically, then we jump to an era which was around 10,000 years ago when we actually started agricultural practices. So that was the time. From in nature, we have actually got our status upgraded. What we call it, we got our status upgraded to humans started living with nature, not living inside nature, living with nature. And ultimately, even if I do not say anything, you will agree with me that in the present industrialized society, we are living over nature. So what is happening? There was a time when we were merely just one of the species like Homo sapiens in nature. So from that species, now we are no more a species. We have become a commanding force. So that commanding force is ought to have so much of intensifying impact on the environment that actually requires that warrants assessment. Now, as a common layman terms, if we try to understand why all this impact came, is while we are in nature, we have started harvesting, utilizing the resources, exploiting the resources with an aim of reaping benefits. But the intensity of resource use bears a linear relationship with the benefits what we obtain from the nature. But then that relationship is not linear all through its life. There is a point of optimum exploitation after which it does actually have a reverse impact. So it is inversely proportional. That is what is the stage we call as over exploitation, right? And then when there is over exploitation of resources, that is when actually the impacts, environmental impacts, are becoming quite evident, and that need to be assessed, and appropriate management strategies need to be formulated. So if one looks at the living lifestyle and all that type of things and general environmental impacts, I mean, I'm sure Dr. Sarath's other speakers, other experts might have already talked about ecological footprints and concept of how to estimate ecological footprint. Just as an introductory, I would like to say that if we take one US citizens as one unit, so we understand that almost 35 Indians create that much of environmental impact or ecological footprint what one US citizen can actually create. So that is the scale of impact which varies from different continents to continent, different countries, based on our socio-cultural practices, life practices, resource requirements, resource utilization, and on the whole, the very concept and understanding about the so-called concept of development, what we consider it as a development. So many continents understand development means a materialistic growth, but for many countries development means a development which leads to happiness, right? So that is how when it leads to happiness, you will see our Himalayan state Bhutan, which is probably the country with the highest happiness index, is not that way very much developed in a materialistic way. But whereas the European world, which is developed completely in a materialistic way, do not have highest happiness index. So that's how it depends what is the kind of development we refer to and what we consider actually as a development. And if so, in the present era, it is completely skewed. Some of the countries have complete access to technological know-how and resources, and some of the countries are devoid of any sort of access to technical know-how and resources. So you can see the disparity, you can see the differences in this slide. I'm sure it is self-explanatory. Now, if this is the kind of development, is it essential? And if we continue with this development, is it going to be sustainable on a long run? So if we have to make development sustainable, then environmental impact assessment comes handy. It's one of the robust scientific tools which facilitates inducing sustainability in developmental practices, which induces sustainability in the way we utilize resources. Now, so if I come to a couple of more issues of developmental projects, like what is development, we discussed, and if that is the form of development which is essential, if that is not essential, then do we have any alternative means to achieve development? Alternatives can be in many ways: alternative to technology, alternative befitting to our socio-cultural practices, and at the end we have to have a project that has to be sustainable, right? So the way we say that development and environment has to go hand in hand, that means if they have to work hand in hand, that means it has to be sustainable, right? So the technology what we are using, is it really apt for a particular socio-cultural, economic and ecological environment? We discussed briefly about how development varies from country to country or continent to continent. In that way, even the technology what is designed by an European country, is it really applicable, or is it applicable for a developing country in its full word and spirit, in its full technicalities? May not be, or maybe. That we need to actually check, and we often fail to check that. What we tend to do is, there is a technology which is developed by one country, we tend to only adopt that technology without actually on ground, without actually evaluating its relevance to our country specific strategy, to our country specific ecological, environment and cultural practices. And if so, if that technology is not suitable, can there be any better technology which can induce less pressure on the local environment? That need to be explored. And if having discussed and said this, we have to actually determine what is the essential level of public safety. Whether you adopt a technology which is developed by your Western world, or you have your own technology with Atmanirbhar Bharat, still we will have to look at the level of public safety, right? And then if that is so, what is the degree of environmental protection that should be guaranteed? Because if you look at the Indian Constitution, it has given rights of public safety to the citizens. So what degree of environmental protection should be guaranteed? And who has to raise the issue? There has to be stakeholders. Who are the plausible stakeholders? Who are the relevant stakeholders? Who can raise the issue? And in this case, can we really rely on authorities fully in the matters of environmental safeguard? Or we need to have alternatives, or we need to have a framework where we also keep providing advisories or suggestions and comments to authorities. So it has to be a holistic understanding of the whole, all the technical issues. Now, so whatever we discussed, such questions with wider implications are rarely raised with reference to most projects. Whenever there is a development project which comes, which is formulated or which is planned to be implemented in a place, all those earlier things what we discussed in a couple of slides is not really discussed. But for some specific projects, it is discussed again in a very superficial manner, not in depth. It is discussed as superficial manner through environmental impact assessment exercises, not actually in a more detailed manner. However, nevertheless, environmental impact assessment is actually a means of documenting all the possible environmental implications of a project. And indeed, it facilitates decision making. So decision makers are given, with not permutation, I would say, it's a combination of different options, as which option is the best fit to achieve, to induce sustainability in a long-term basis in this area, if this developmental project is being proposed or being prescribed. Now that is how it is one of the powerful environmental safeguard in project planning. Not only implementation, it is from the planning stage. So why it is a powerful environmental safeguard? Because it predicts the impact of a proposed activity, potential impact or possible impact. I'm sorry. And then it also compares with various alternatives. What are the alternatives? Alternatives can be technological alternative can be site-specific alternative. So either you have the technology, you have different technologies, because the project proponent is proposing a technology, but we can actually, the decision, the resource group who are carrying out the EIA exercise, they can actually say that there are many other technologies are available for this kind of project. So there are different technological alternatives can be suggested, or different sites. Project proponent might have opted for one side, but the team, a resource team actually can suggest for, they're looking for alternate sites. Such a case study also I am going to present in the this class itself. And it also helps in identifying best combination of economic, environmental and social cost and benefit. Let me tell you friends, India is probably one of the country with diverse socio-cultural and economic scenario. You won't find such diversity in any other country. So EIA, the relevance of EIA as a powerful environmental safeguard tool is much more applicable in a diversified nation like India, because every region, every district or every state, your combination, your economic, environmental, social combinations are different. So you cannot practically have a one thumb rule kind of thing in case of EIA. This is the thumb rule, you should go for it. No, for every site, for every strategic location, you have to have a different set of approach. And ultimately, it prescribes a best fit conservation model. If we cannot have a best fit conservation model, then the EIA report, what is being prepared, is not basically a technically robust EIA report. Or it is not basically a technically robust EIA exercise. So what does it do? It predicts likely environmental impacts. It finds ways and means to reduce unacceptable impacts. There will be impacts which are acceptable. There are impacts which are unacceptable. If it is unacceptable, EIA helps in making ways and means of preparing mitigatory strategy. You have to develop a lot of mitigation plan. Just not by shutting down the project, rather by looking at the relevance of the project for a local case scenario on a long-term basis, and prescribe different mitigation options. It also helps to shape the project so that it suits to the local environment, right? And it definitely presents the predictions and options to the decision makers, because the decision makers are the ones who are a team of seasoned researchers, seasoned policymakers, seasoned administrators. So they require just combination of different metrics, this and this. All those combinations are presented in such a lucid manner that they will be able to comprehend easily, and then they have to comprehend easily and pick up, yes, this is what is the best fit solution, and this is what can be done in a appropriate manner. So that prescription need to be implemented on a ground level by the project proponent, who actually goes ahead in proposing that particular project in a particular given area, right? So this is something very, very important in EIA. For a country like India, in Republic India, we say that we have Ashoka pillar with 3 lions. And I used to say, for me, the EIA also is based on an Ashoka pillar with 3 lions. Those 3 lions are integrity, utility, and sustainability. Dear friends, if any of the lions, the morphometric dimension, or I would say in conservation ecology terms, if I say if morphometry or the phenotype is little bit compromised, then actually it loses its significance in word and spirit. So EIA has to be an integrity based, it has to be fair, objective based, and unbiased and fully balanced. Utility based, it should be able to provide balanced, credible information for decision making. It cannot be biased. It has to be free from prejudice. And sustainability, the final goal is actually it has to result in environmental safeguards. Sarath, is it clear, audible, or somebody has to tell me?
Yeah, very audible, very audible.
Okay, thank you.
Carry on, please, carry on.
Yeah, now let me talk about the journey of EIA in India, because actually if I talk about the history of EIA in a global context, I mean, it will consume quite an amount of time, but let us confine to India. Basically in India, the concept of EIA was initially introduced in 1982, early 80s, because that was the time India, the citizens of India started dreaming about an India which will have a new concept of development with utmost up-to-date infrastructure. So have that infrastructure upgradation in our country, we have to be dependent on a lot of donor agencies, foreign donor agencies who agreed to offer loans for inducing infrastructure development projects in India. But then those financial support do not come just like that. It comes with its own regulatory measures. So those regulatory measures are, to fulfill donor agency requirement, we have to carry out environmental impact assessment exercise for the project what we are proposing. Right now, although that was the case, but still we were a little bit slow, in deliberation on that, until we had one of the deadliest disaster in the mankind on the globe. That is happened on 3rd December, early morning of 3rd December 1984, which happened in Bhopal, in Madhya Pradesh, capital city of Madhya Pradesh, in Union Carbide factory. So that Bhopal gas tragedy that actually opened up our eyes. And after Bhopal gas tragedy, there was mounting internal pressure to cope with the environmental safety and security. And that is where it took the form of activism, and it took, friends, mind you, it took 12 years of judicial activism to give it a legal standing. From a conceptual paper or from a theoretical aspect to give it a legal standing, it took 12 years of judicial activism, and from this itself we can understand how fast we were implementing the EIA in our country in its word and spirit. Now, so legal standing means in the year 1994, India got the first notification on environmental impact assessment notification promulgated, Gazette notification, and I will be talking the legal part of that notification tomorrow in the tomorrow lecture, but then today we will discuss more about the technical part. So that EIA notification 94 initially had some around 29 industries in the beginning, then later we added up 32 and 34 industries which were considered to have adverse impact on environment, which need to be scrutinized under the same notification. So scrutinized based on their potential impacts on environment, scale of impact on the environment. However, the legal standing, what we call, it is basically legal instrument, but you will know the strength of the legal instrument when it is actually it is promulgated as a notification. It was not an act. It is not an act. We have different acts: Mines Act, Fishery Act, Environment Protection Act. There are many acts, but for environmental impact assessment, it is not act. It was a notification. So the fickleness with which the instrument are tweaked, that itself is a good indication of the nature of the instrument, legal instrument. When it is notification, it is subjected to amendments. So EIA notification 94 underwent 12 amendments and 4 other Gazette notification in 12 years. Ultimately, we got a revised notification in 2006. And 2006 revised notification again underwent 29 amendments, 10 other gazette notification oblique orders, maybe orders in next 14 years. So that in 2020, now we have a draft EIA notification 2020, which is published by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, published in its website, open for comments and suggestions, and inform citizens of our country. I'm sure many stakeholders, they have been going through that draft, and they are offering their comments to the Union Government of India. And I have followed some of the news updates that it seems Parliamentary Standing Committee is also going to have a deliberation on specific sections of that draft notification. Right, and that 2006 notification, so far almost 348 office memos have been already issued to clarify, and it counting. But had it been an act, it would have been, wonderfully, implemented in the form of a rule. But since it is notification, it is subjected to amendments. Coming to the technical part, procedure. Yes, as I said initially, I briefed, it involves a number of steps, but no universally accepted format for EIA. When I talk to students, many times students ask, sir, which book we need to follow where we can get a complete procedure of EIA. I have to say that there are many books which are written by seasoned researchers across the globe in Europe, America, and many other countries. Different authors have written different books. But then again, as I said, EIA, if you have to make it an effective tool, it has to be more relevant in a site-specific case. So instead of adopting some established method, it has to be better to focus on the established method and to also adopt new methods which can be borrowed or adapted from new research papers and new research findings, so that it is a blended approach for an effective implementation of EIA guideline to achieve sustainability in resource conservation, because its integrated details vary widely. And then this procedure can vary actually depending on what kind of EIA we have to carry out, whether it's a preliminary EIA, rapid EIA, or comprehensive EIA. Because preliminary EIA is basically, mostly it is a reconnaissance. We have to only do a reconnaissance of the major impacts, whereby we identify impacts to be studied in detail. We are not doing impact assessment. We are actually making a checklist of impact, that what all impacts to be studied in detail for such kind of development projects, and what all parameters to be examined or analyzed. When either before the project, prior the project, during the project, posterior to the project implementation, right? And precisely this is something like a desk work with a little bit of field efforts, because mostly a desk review, and which is based on existing information from the papers, reports, maps. We can also have discussion with the different stakeholders, which includes both project opponents and project opponents, and we can also have a area where project is likely to come up, and re-examining the scopes and objective which might have been delineated in the detailed project report. Whenever a project is coming up, the first thing to understand about the project is to examine the detailed project report. Now what happens? Next component is a rapid EIA. Rapid EIA is a seasonal exercise, one particular complete one season within a 3 months or so. We will have to do a rapid environmental impact assessment exercise, which by considering the baseline data collection, including that done for the preliminary EIA, and also we have to include prediction of environmental impacts, and then based on those impacts, environmental management plan need to be prepared, right? Which will include how to mitigate the impacts which are predicted. If we cannot mitigate the impact, then that technology need to be changed again. If we have a mitigation strategy to for the impacts, then yes, that technology can be sustainable. Because if you keep changing the technology, if you keep shifting to the different locations, then it is not going to be a viable project. Because in a real life scenario, if you examine, you actually need developmental projects. Otherwise, without that, our aspirations and our aim for growth cannot be achieved. So we have to have growth, aspiration, development, and environment and ecology and conservation all together. All should go hand in hand. And that is where precisely the Chair for Sustainable Development, what program they have started, is in a very right context. Then we have to go for comprehensive EIA. As the term indicates, it is a comprehensive assessment. When it is a comprehensive assessment, it will not be restricted to a particular season. Rather, it will be restricted to a full year, completing all the seasons depending on the agroclimatic condition in that area. So India, as I said, in a diverse country, so diverse not only in terms of culture, but diverse in terms of in agricultural practices, agroclimatic zones, biogeography, and all that. So every region, every specific area will have different climatic zone, and accordingly we will have to identify what are the major prevailing seasons there, and we will have to collect field data, do field assessment in every season for a particular year, so that you understand the seasonality in a particular environmental component. Because when you understand the seasonality, you can actually try to link with the potential impact the project is going to have in a due course of time once it is operationalized. Accordingly, you can predict the impact, and accordingly, you can come out with a detailed environmental management plan. Just a minute, excuse me. Now we will, go to the next one. We will look at what all steps we can follow is scoping. So scoping is nothing but, you have to identify the significant effects associated with the proposed action, right? And also we have to establish the geographical scope of analysis. So whenever a project is proposed, we have to ensure that how much area we should take up. So the area of coverage, geographical scope of analysis is not dependent on the expert, is not dependent on a person who is involved in the EIA exercise. There has to be a scientific basis as how do you examine the locate the geographical area, what has to be considered for the EIA. And you have to have a specific time frame, like rapid or comprehensive, have a specific time frame. And you also have to identify other actions which are affecting the resource availability, ecosystem, and human communities of concern. Then we need to go to the next step, that is called describing the affected environment. That means we have to characterize. We have to characterize how much resource is available. If the project is getting operationalized, from where they will have resource, what is the source of resources for them, raw materials, what is the type of ecosystem, what is the regeneration capacity in that ecosystem, whether the exploitation of raw material from that ecosystem will be much higher than the regenerative capacity of the ecosystem. If that is so, then it is not going to be sustainable. So that also has to be identified, examined. Humans, community which are going to be affected, how they will be resettled, how they will be rehabilitated, even not only human being, but also nature, wildlife, and forestry, and all other biological resources need to be included in the analysis. And then we also have to characterize, the stresses affecting those resources, and the human community and their relation to the regulatory threshold, because there are many guidelines which are already established by different regulatory authority as what should be the air quality criteria, what should be the water quality criteria in an area, how much should be the nutrients or particular contaminants in a sediment system in a particular area. So we have to keep such guidelines in mind while we are recommending different mitigation measures while analyzing and examining the field situation. Now we also have to define a baseline condition for the resource, ecosystem, and human community. Now when I say baseline condition, let me tell you a loop-sidedness of this is that nowadays whoever carries out an EIA says we are collecting baseline data, which is essentially not true. Baseline by the term itself indicates the characterization or the database which is generated from an area which has not experienced development, which is completely an undeveloped area or which is a natural area. Once you have an industry in that area, subsequently, whenever you are going to have another industry nearby area, the data what you are going to generate is no more baseline data. However, in a general term, everybody keeps using baseline, but that is not baseline. Somebody has already generated a baseline data, and the data what you are going to generate in today's date is actually a data which will substantiate or data which will add on to the existing database for that particular area. So that will help you in analyzing the cumulative impact, not the impact with respect to the baseline condition. That is something, a scientific basis, which one has to understand. And why most of the EIA team or most of the EIA report people do criticize is that everybody says baseline data, and baseline data. Now, for a given area, there was one industry in 1970s, before 1980s, when EIN came into picture. there was no industry in an area when EIA report was prepared. So that time the data which was generated could be baseline. And within 200 meter or 300 meter, if another industry is coming up, the data which will be generated while carrying out an EIA for the second industry cannot be a baseline data for area, because that existing industry has already started contributing, generating lot of waste material or emissions or discharges or whatsoever, whatever form of output it will have into the environment. So the data what one will generate during assessing the second industry for conducting EIA for second industry will add on to the existing baseline data. That can no more be a baseline data. If that industry is being proposed after 5 kilometer or 10 kilometer away, when there is no industry in that area, then that can be a baseline data. And I'm sure this distinction has to be understood very clearly. Then we have to determine the environmental consequences. That is, you have to identify the cause and effect relationship of the proposed activity, and we also have to determine what magnitude of effect we will have and significance of cumulative effect. Exactly, this is what I talked about baseline data. Now, when you are generating data for the second industry, the impact what you are predicting is not big in that area. That impact is not going to be a sole impact or individual impact of that particular proposed industry. The impact could be a cumulative impact, because already there is one industry existing. So if I have to tell you a small example, there is a concept of atmospheric lower atmosphere. We will have a lot of atmospheric gases which is released, and there will be atmospheric cocktails. Now one industry as per the DPR, if you understand, one industry is releasing lot of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, whereas the second industry might be releasing only nitrogen oxides of nitrogen in the atmosphere. But you do not know what is happening, what atmospheric cocktail process happens in the lower atmosphere in the presence of sunlight. Is a mixing, a phytochemical reaction of all these chemicals, and there is a new chemical which can be an emerging chemical that is developed, that is generated in the atmosphere. So, but in EIA and in assessment report, we will say that no, this industry as per the DPR, it is going to emit only this particular chemical. It is not correct scientifically, because in that case we have ignored what the existing industries are already generating, and most of the EIA fail to address this component. And friends, let me I take this forum to urge all of you to consider cumulative impact assessment in a right spirit while considering environmental impact assessment, because we have to if you analyze that, then only you will be able to come out with a proper mitigation strategy. An industry might be generating a chemical A, but over the year you do not see chemical A in the atmosphere, but you see chemical C or chemical D, which may be a product of reaction of chemical A in the atmosphere with another chemical already existing in the atmosphere. So we have to consider that. That is precisely what I'm trying to say. So we will go to the EIA process. Is about the concept is developed and site is selected, and so project proponent submits it. So when it is submitted, the project proposal is submitted with relevant information to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change now, and it is screened. After screening, its scope is evaluated. After that, EIA exercise is carried out. So the draft EIA report is put for public consultation. Public comes forward in suggesting different, they offer different comments and suggestions, and they seek clarifications. And after all that exercise, the appraisal committee takes a decision. So this whole process I will discuss in detail as per the legal instrument. I will discuss in detail tomorrow in the next class. And then there has to be post-project monitoring, because once the project is sanctioned, it is likely to have impact on a periodic, in a regular basis. So we will have to keep monitoring the environmental factors in regular interval, maybe quarterly or half yearly or annually, depending on the conditions set aside or stipulated in the environmental clearance notification or the order. If we have to look at the more theoretical organogram of the institutions which are involved in EIA process in our country, each ministry is the apex authority, which has an EIA impact assessment division, and that has regional offices in different states. So impact assessment division works in coherent with the the Central Pollution Control Board, which is again in different states, it has regional offices, and also it works in coherence with the state pollution control boards, which also has regional offices. So state pollution control board basically operates at the state level, and in case of union territory administration, it is pollution control committee, union territory level pollution control committee, that comes under the control of government of India, not the particular state. And then all they work in coherence so as to facilitate an effective environmental clearance process, which again we will discuss tomorrow in detail. Now, this is something one of my students had carried out a comparative analysis of environmental clearance process in basically in South Asia. We carried out for different countries, because we considered South Asia just because we have lot of habitat contiguity. We have 7 or 8 countries in South Asia, but when you start studying ecology, you have to understand the geological past. When you understand the geological past, even the present scenario also, you will see, except for the political barrier or political boundary, otherwise we have a habitat contiguity. Our mangrove ecosystems, we spread the mangrove ecosystem is spread over both Bangladesh and India. Run of Kutch is spread over both India and Pakistan, and Pak Bay or the Gulf of Mannar, and that way that marine stretch is spread over, Sri Lanka is sharing boundary with India, and Himalayan ecosystem, we are sharing our boundary with Nepal and sharing our boundary with Bhutan. So that way, if we look at it, is the political boundary that divides us, not the ecological boundary. So we took all the 7 countries, and here I am presenting only the process which we have made in the form of a flowchart diagram, what is applicable for Indian case. And this we are going to discuss in detail tomorrow. This is only a snapshot for today. Tomorrow anyway, we are going to discuss in detail how we carry out this process. So this is what happens when a project is proposed in an area. So I mean, one thing which is appreciable here is the project alternative. That is, before the project gets clearance from ministry, I mean, the team which is carrying out the EIA exercise can have the technical input to have project alternatives in any stage of the project implementation, in the sense either technological changes, technological modifications, or site specific modifications, and that actually helps the project having lesser ecological footprint in that particular area and contributing more to the welfare of the society. That society includes both human and wildlife. When I say society, it is not only human being, but it is also wildlife, because wildlife we cannot exclude in our decision making process. And a typical assessment that actually includes various factors, so which is a prerequisite for data collection. So how do you collect the data? How do you decide what all data need to be collected? So data need to be collected when you are focusing on who are the receptors, either human being or the natural resources or the flora and fauna in the area, the cultural heritage components, landscapes in that area, or livelihood, local culture and economy, and health and safety. So these are different segments which, if your target is one of them, accordingly your data set has to be redesigned, and the sampling and data collection, primary data collection, secondary data collection, primary data generation, the strategy need to be identified accordingly. Now, what the public in general thinks about EIA is, public thinks that it's actually a very expensive process, right? These are some of the opinion, and it delays the project, because if I propose and I get a if clearance is not required, if I just propose a project, and if I pump in a lot of money, starts construction, initiate the project, then it is easy. If I have to go for EIA, it is expensive or it delays the project. And public feels that it slows down economic development and lack of skilled human resource to prepare EIA reports. That is true. However, in due course of time, Quality Council of India under NABET, National Accreditation Board for Education and Training, now they have started accrediting different consultant organizations who are having requisite manpower, requisite human resources to carry out EIA exercise. Now, why public feels all these is, public has a mindset. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Sarath might have organized other lectures when people might have talked about cornucopian's principle, New Malthus principle and all that. Public has a very typical attitude of immediate gain from nature. But I feel as an ecologist, I propose and I urge that we should not look for immediate gain, but we should look for a gain which is sustained, a gain which is realized, visualized, and witnessed on a long-term basis. So you should have development, you should have benefit, you should have growth on a long-term basis, which is sustainable. Sustainable means, I mean, your ecosystem is also stable, that is also surviving, as well as your developmental projects are also surviving. It should not happen that you carry out a development work and after 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, the whole project becomes redundant or the whole project becomes non-functional, because it simply failed to address many crucial issues actually which can be addressed through EIA. So though public feels this because there is a lot of awareness which is required. Awareness about the brighter things of EIA. Because of recent media reports, recent many cases, people only talk about the other aspect of EIA, but I'm sure it has a much more brighter side than the other side. So we need to, as a researcher, we need to highlight its brighter side, and we have to make the public aware of the strengths of EIA. Now, EIA notification 2006, there are eight different in the schedule, 8 different categories of project are mentioned, in which there are more than 40 different projects are included, which the Quality Council of India, National Accreditation Board for Education and Training, in their document manual, they have delineated as project sector, and these are the projects. This is actually available in the Google, I mean, in open forum also. You can just type QCI NABET manual for EIA, and you will get the PDF document. If you are not able to get it, I can also share with any of you who is interested to have a look at that. So these are the 40 different type of sectors, different activities, and this is where I am saying, as per MOEFCC notification, eight different categories. So from 1 it starts to 8 different categories. Now that QCI manual is actually talks about different functional areas under 12 different functional areas. So human resource who are eligible to carry out one impact assessment can be categorized under 12 different functional areas, like land use, air pollution monitoring, meteorology, water pollution, and so on. So when you look at, these are the major areas, or these are the specific areas in the environment where impact can be assessed, where the condition, what you call as baseline data, can be generated, impact can be assessed, mitigatory measures can be suggested, right? So the whole team can be led by a team leader who can be an EIA coordinator, and it will have other experts like functional area experts, and fresh master students can become functional area associates, FAA. After having 3 years of experience as FAA, they can be upgraded to FAE, like functional area expert, again by an assessment, subsequent assessment by the QCI team. And after you are a FAE, you carry out many number of EIA projects, then you will be eligible to be a EIA coordinator, EC, under a particular sectors. So what are the geographical areas for carrying out EIA? If you look at on a broad scientific term, it is air quality, that is one what we are measuring, water quality we are measuring, vegetation we are measuring, wildlife we are measuring, forestry we are measuring, fishery we are measuring, fishery also we are measuring, historical sites also we are measuring, and many other components, socio-cultural practices we are measuring, and nonetheless recreation, river, lake, community, all those things are also we are measuring. Because in somebody who might have already covered some course on environmental economics, they will actually say that what are the goods and services one can obtain, or a particular ecosystem offers various goods and services to the society, to the human society, or to the next, I mean, we obtain such goods and services. One can be a cultural services also. So you get a lot of recreation. If you have a well-managed wetland ecosystem, if you have a well-managed marine ecosystem, when you go to a beach, you get a soothing effect. From your stressful life, one goes to one particular beach and sits there for half an hour, you get a soothing effect. And that is something which you cannot, measure. It is a subjective, it is a qualitative, realization rather than a quantitative one. But then that particular aspect also need to be considered while carrying out environmental impact assessment, right? So what strategy one need to follow? That strategy about the project and strategy about the requirement. We have to, take help of different topo maps or topo sheets, like satellite imageries. Then you have to carry out reconnaissance, and before carrying out the EIA assessment, you have to go for obtaining permission. Think that your project, you cannot carry out the projects without obtaining a particular permission, because there are different authorities who will give you permission. If you are going to enter inside a protected area, you have to seek permission from the chief wildlife warden of that particular state. So just because you are an EIA team, you cannot, you will not be allowed to enter into different areas. For example, one industry is coming up in along the Gulf of Kutch towards extreme northwestern corner of the Kutch. That means you also have to go for securing permission from Border Security Force, because that is an area where we share boundary with Pakistan. So there are many authorities. From which you have to obtain permissions. Then you have to have a clear-cut strategy for collection of data. Like primary data have to be generated following best practices and scientific methodologies. Secondary data need to be also collected and collated and synthesized. And the sampling plan, detailed sampling plan, has to be field-based as well as laboratory-based. So for every component, there are methodologies which are available, right? Now, we will go to the detailed data collection. You have to have identify what are the source of data where you can collect, and the target institution, you can actually visit various library repositories, or if somebody has carried out a research project which is concluded just recently, and they have already carried out some assessment, environmental assessment, they have generated some quality data which you can actually use for your project. Yes, you can do that, because having a repeat sampling actually consumes resources and consumes time. If already existing data on similar components is available, you can always take that. And you can also have to procure data sets, like from meteorological department, satellite imageries need to be procured, and data need to be compiled, analyzed, and synthesized. So when you present the data after compilation, it has to be in easily understandable manner. The simple aspects, it's tabular, and many of the times, if it is lengthy tables, your decision-making authority will not be able to follow it. So better to go for graphical presentation. Maybe I would suggest to go for line diagrams, histograms, pie charts, and so on. So based on your assessment, you can go for inferences and describing the details about the technical part of the project and what impact you have done, what impact you have predicted, and you have to do appropriate reporting in that, right? Just giving an example as how do you delineate the geographical area of analysis. I was leading a team when we did a regional level impact assessment program for some of the mining clusters. It is not only one mining site, there are many mining sites in a district. So what you can actually do is you take topo map, cadastral map, and satellite map, and identify villages, also identify different project locations. And it is good that you try to delineate your area in the concentric ring instead of going by the way physical roads go. No, the environmental, the dispersal of pollutants will be based on the prevailing wind direction and wind speed. So it's always better to go proceed with a concentric ring side, maybe from project center, project site to 2.5 kilometer, 5 kilometer, 7.5 kilometer, 10 kilometer, 12.5 kilometer, and so on. So you will have to look at what difference and what interval you can actually fix your sampling sites. So there are many strategies, like for air sampling, we follow a lot of models whereby we will be able to evaluate the dispersal pattern of the pollutants. Accordingly, we decide how many sites to be collected. In case of water, also similarly, in case of water, you also look at if it is related to aquifer pattern, you have to look at through lithological map and hydrological map whether the subsurface aquifers are connected, they are confined aquifers or non-confined aquifers, and so on. And in case of river systems, it has to be a linear fashion with a regular interval. So that is And if there are human settlements and villages available, you will have to decide accordingly which is the nearest village and which is the farthest village. And going for project alternatives, so having an environmental assessment is not only about, you know, carrying out the environmental assessment. Also look at that whether that particular project is particular site is appropriate for that project, or can we propose some other sites where that project can be implemented. Though it is a scientific and technical part, not many teams do suggest it, not many case studies are available, but at least I am aware of some case study which we had carried out in a case in Tamil Nadu, where the Department of Atomic Energy wanted to establish India Newton Observatory, which in Institute of Mathematical Science, Chennai, was coordinating that program. Now they wanted to have some subterranean alignments, so definitely they have to go for some hill areas. And then initially they had proposed a site in Western Ghats, but then when we carried out the environmental impact assessment exercise, while describing the environment, it was suggested in that the agency should actually must look for another alternate site with similar geological alignments, because for them geological alignment is much more a criteria than anything else. So similar geological alignment, because Western Ghat is a mega biodiversity hotspot, and that was a corridor for different wild organisms like elephants and so on. And very, very encouragingly, the Institute of Mathematical Science, which we had coordinated, and Department of Atomic Energy, agreed to the suggestion, and they looked for another similar area in Tamil Nadu with similar geological alignments near Madurai, that is Tevaram Hills. And then the project was it started operationalizing. The construction started in the Tevaram Hills. So that is some of the brighter side of EIA, which we need to highlight to make people understand how EIA is a robust tool to facilitate sustainability. And then when we are collecting even secondary data, you have to also look for the suitability of the data, reliability, its adequacy, accuracy, and representativeness. Just because data sets are available, we cannot take that and do some analysis which actually do not live up to the spirit and aspiration or the requirement of the project. If a data set which is not relevant to the project, we should try to avoid it. Because secondary data, there is a problem. The only problem is its reliability, only problem is its adequacy and accuracy. So one who collects secondary data also have to go for data outliers. You cannot have extreme outliers, which actually makes it very difficult to take a decision depending on the environmental characteristics or the data sets. So you have to remove the outliers and make a data set more usable and scientifically presented. And then you also have to check the legibility of the data, completeness of the data, and how consistent with the data sets were generated. So that also needs to be looked at. If the periodicity is not maintained, it's better for you that during your stage of you can try to generate additional data which can sub already existing data sets. Right? Your data set will actually more complementary to the existing scenario. And then you have to process that. It's not about only data processing can be computerized, and you have to identify the extreme values, and we have to also follow basic statistical tools like measure of central tendency. Like you have to determine the mean, standard deviation, the percentiles, because this decision makers need to be understood. They have to be given a scenario that this is the range, this is the lowest value, and this is the highest value. In addition to giving just mean value, you also have to give them that this is the range of the values which are expected before the project comes, during the project, and after the project, because it has to be recognized. The trend has to be recognized over space and time. Anything in case of environmental analysis, in resource analysis, in resource ecology, anything you analyze, anything you evaluate has to be over space and time. If your spatial analysis or spatial analysis and temporal analysis, one of the component is missing, then that is an incomplete analysis. then you cannot do a effective prediction. Your effective prediction depends how complete your analysis over space and time. And then this we have already discussed, like you can go for line diagrams, block diagrams, pie charts, thematic maps can be prepared, and so on. So your EIA report, when you prepare a EIA report, actually the generic structure of EIA report has already been suggested under the environmental impact assessment notification. That also is available in a document which is published by ministry. And however, the broad schemes of broad sections of EIA report is like you have to provide the project details, the objectives and scope of the study, results of data analysis, like pre-project scenario during like construction phase, operation phase, and so on, because the analysis will say where the raw materials are sourced out, where the waste materials are being dumped, how it is being treated, and so on, and the salient findings based on the baseline characteristics. Again, I'm using the term baseline because it is written in the document, in the legal instrument. That is why I am bound to use the term baseline. But scientific understanding wise, for many areas, the term baseline may not be applicable. Rather, it will be augmented process of data set generation over existing data sets. Now, analysis of the impact, you have to predict the impact, both construction phase and operation phase and post-operation phase, and cost-benefit analysis and cost-effective analysis, CBA and CEA. So somebody who might be taking a class on environmental economics is the best fit for a resource person to describe about that. I'm sure they might also have taught somebody that how do you carry out a cost-benefit analysis, so that we say that, yeah, this is the project which is sustainable on a long-term basis, sustainable both technically for the project purpose, sustainable ecologically for the environment, and sustainable economically or viable economically based on the cost benefit analysis. And then we also can have an environment management plan which describes the mitigatory measures. Yes, agreed, any project cannot be free from any environmental impact. Every project will have some sort of environmental impact. But yes, we can develop strategy, we can suggest, we can design mitigatory measures that is a part of environmental management plan. And then we also have a section on summary and concluding times as to say how the project is and where does it stand. So that helps the evaluator to have a broad and brief idea about the whole project. Another example, the same mining cluster what we had carried out is that why I was talking about different components is it is basically a limestone mine cluster. If you look at, one is pre, one is during, and one is post. So when it is pre, it looks like how much area they will be covering over how many years of time, and then what all villages are there who are going to be affected. If it is during, the already mining has started, so how are they managing? Sarath, can you see the cursor I am moving? Is it visible?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. If it is during the project, that means one has to look at, yes, these are the overburdens which are being generated when mining is going on. So how the overburdens are being dumped or being stored somewhere? If it is being stored, is it just stored just like that? If it is just like that, it is stored. That means with a single rain, it will leach out different chemicals to surrounding areas so as to contaminate the underground aquifer, contaminate the surface water structures. So it is altogether important what sort of waste dump stabilization plan has been proposed in that or suggested in the environmental management plan. What type of plants need to be planted? But then that is a short-term one, because there has to be something called mine closure plan. As long as we go ahead with the mining, if we keep proceeding with the mining gradually, from backside the mine also need to be closed gradually. So when the mine gets closed gradually, again those overburden or these dumps again will be removed from here, and this material will be used to fill the pit which is generated while excavating the ore material. And over that again different stabilization, land soil stabilization exercise has to be carried out by using native plant species. And that prescription, that is again another technical component as what type of plant species one need to suggest. So there is a whole lot of exercise which goes on. Even here there is something called waste pond or ash pond, especially coal mine area, coal mines which have a captive power plant. That means lot of ash, bottom ash or fly ash will be generated, and that ash also need to be dumped somewhere, which is called as usually an ash pond. So we have to ensure that the ash pond is fully protected, secured scientifically. So otherwise, if any breach on the ash pond can actually impact kilometers together in the surrounding villages, which we have seen in many cases in our country. So these are some of the areas which you see in a field manner, and this is only one of the sector out of those 40 list which I presented in previous slides. Otherwise, we have different category of industry, and we can have different components to discuss. And then your mitigation plan cannot ignore, or cannot be, it cannot be complete if you do not have an effective corridor. Let me tell you, a habitat, wildlife and corridor management plan. If you have a habitat management plan but you have not thought of the corridor, it is difficult. Because of your project, if your proposed project is going to induce fragmentation in an existing wildlife habitat, that means you have to design in such a way the management plan that it ensures there is a corridor for the movement of wildlife from its existing habitat in one area to another area, because your new proposed area is going to be an hindrance for their free passage, for their free movement. So those sort of things has to be kept in mind. Friends, just because wildlife do not have a voice, wildlife cannot cast vote, we cannot, and they cannot remain as a mute spectators. We have to, we have to raise voice for them, and then as a learned citizen and a humble citizen, we have to be a stakeholder for them who will actually consider their case as well. So your habitat and corridor management plan has to be, realistic in prevailing conditions, and it has to be based on existing ground scenario and anticipated changes. We cannot take some data, old data, as this is the time when this many elephants were existing in that area and all that type of things. You have to say how many elephants are now there. Or this is the time in 1970s or 80s, this many species of birds were available in that area, by looking at secondary data. No, that is not going to help. You see, 1970s or 80s, this many species of birds were available, but what are the species of birds are available in present date? And accordingly, you have to look for their habitat management. So while you are making that plan, you have to examine all the species, whatever wildlife species available in that area, their IUCN assessment. IUCN also comes out with global assessments periodically, and one can look at the IUCN red list in their website and check what is the threat categories, and accordingly the plan can be compiled. And then we have to at the end have a sustainable conservation model, which will be a win-win situation. That is what, while we invested 2-3 years while developing this sustainability science course, Dr. Sarath will agree with me, every discussion table we have to have an agreement that we have to have a win-win situation. We also have to have development, we also have to have ecology, we also need environmental conservation and wildlife conservation, because it has to be a win-win situation. And then something which usually in environmental impact assessment exercise people do not consider. Now when I'm started involved more on this conservation biology, conservation ecology, I propose that population viability analysis has to be a component which need to be included in every environmental impact assessment exercise. If we cannot say that what is the minimum viable population this habitat can support, because Dr. Sarath might have described earlier many lectures about the tipping point, about the carrying capacity. So when it is a tipping point in an ecosystem, that is where population viability analysis is more important. And yes, carrying capacity analysis in earlier classes also you might have been already described that we have to look at field situation on different concepts. We have to carry out the carrying capacity analysis as what type of habitat situation, what is the resource availability. So when a new project is coming up, how much of resource the new project is going to harvest from the field, and how much of wildlife is available in that area. That means dependent community, whether it is wildlife or human being who are already harvesting the resource. Now already we have a community who is dependent on that area, but a new industry is again being proposed. So we have to see how much capacity that area has to carry the such kind of dependence. So those dependents can be human beings, those dependents can be your wildlife, those dependents can be your a project which is coming up in that particular area. I think I have tried to touched upon, not detailed discussion, but touched upon all the concepts that is required for EIA. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much, Sarath, for having me, chipping me in to interact with all your, students who have enrolled for the program. And anybody, I'm free, I'm accessible to clarify any of your issues which you need a better clarity. Thank you so much.